All right. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar, What RIAs Need to Know About Cybersecurity in 2023. I'm Jonathan Addington. I'm going to be your host today, and I am the owner of CyberSecureRIA. So first, to get started, there's a little series of buttons at the bottom. You can use that Q&A button to ask us questions during the webinar. Can you do me a favor and just make sure that it comes up? And being in tech, I know that these things can always go sideways and always at the worst possible time. So if you can hear me, will you please type, I can hear you in the little area where there's a spot to type a question? Awesome, thank you. And one more request, if you see a little kitten on the screen, go ahead and type in that Q&A box, I can see you. Thank you. And finally, you're going to want to grab a pencil or something. There's a lot we're going to go over, and you are going to want to be able to refer to it later. Quick note, we had a lot of people that are already in IT sign up for today's webinar, and that is great. While I'm going to do my best to avoid geek speak and engineering terms, this is as important for you as for the advisors you support so that you're able to support your firm. All right, so who am I? I'm Jonathan Addington. I'm the president of CyberSecureRIA. I have been in technology since 2004 officially. I began JM Addington Technology Solutions in 2010, and cybersecurity was the focus since the beginning. CyberSecureRIA began more recently as JM Addington became more and more financially focused. And so we formed CyberSecureRIA. And today we have a full staff to support advisors across everything that you need. And that includes working side by side with existing IT providers, whether you're an external firm or you've got internal IT. All right, so before we get started, why listen to me? Well, I've been doing this a very long time, both personally and professionally. I'm a recognized expert in the industry, and I literally wrote the book on this. My personal mission, secure SEC RIAs. Because historically, there's been a real gap between what's needed and what small businesses are able to get in cybersecurity. And recently, the regulatory risk for you has gone up tenfold. The risk of losing client data has gone up tenfold. The loss of trust from clients as a result is a lot higher. And so the loss of income for clients and business owners alike is a lot higher than it was even just a couple of years ago. And I know you don't see a lot of small businesses that were attacked in the news, but small businesses are attacked every single day. Small businesses don't go to the Wall Street Journal to volunteer that they were just attacked. Would you want to let your community know that you had just lost thousands of dollars because someone at your company clicked on something? But there are a lot of stories. It happens all the time to small businesses. I can tell you stories about CPAs, real estate firms, RIAs, other types of financial advisors, and a myriad of other small businesses just like yours that have been attacked and it didn't make the news. In fact, the only reason we're not going to go over some of those stories is it would take up the entire webinar. 1 out of 5 users will click on a malicious link. I want you to think about that for just a moment. 20% of your employees will click on something bad. So let's zoom out for just a minute. When I ask CEOs and business owners, do you know somebody personally that had an incident, an attack, and it didn't make the news? Everybody always knows somebody. I have yet to have an exception. This is just to go back and say small businesses are attacked every day, even if you don't know about it. In fact, most US businesses experienced a successful phishing attack last year. And that's not just big firms. 99% of businesses are small businesses. So that means that 74% of all small businesses were successfully phished just last year. 65% of those experienced a business email compromise where the attacker got into somebody's email, the CEOs or the executive or accountants or something. And another 47% had a ransomware infection. So if you do the math, 74% times 65%, your odds of being successfully phished in 2023 are 48.1%. Would you like to tell your clients that you are open to this level of risk? Are you personally okay with that kind of risk? All right, quick personal disclosure as we get into the stuff with the SEC and other regulations. I'm not a lawyer. I don't even play one on TV.
There are, of course, states that have their own additional regulations. Some are more onerous than others, but here's a map that shows every state that has its own regulations. We don't promise to be experts in every state, but we can help you get through their regulations from a technical perspective, no matter what.
And while I'm not a lawyer, I am a cybersecurity expert. Everything that we go over today are things that my firm helps with and things that we do. We're the full IT department for smaller firms, and we partner with other IT providers and internal IT departments at larger firms on the security side. So this webinar, we're going to go over why the SEC created the cybersecurity rule in the first place. We're going to go over the new reporting and disclosure requirements, especially the public-facing disclosures. We're going to go over some of the existing laws and regulations that the SEC can use to enforce the rule, what the primary requirements of the rule are, and what the difference between compliance and security is. All right, so why is there the rule in the first place? Well, one of the first things the SEC notes in their rule is how bad cybersecurity attacks are today. They're going up everywhere, and it is an exponential rise. The predictions are that it is going to cost $10.5 trillion globally by 2025 in cybercrime costs. In 2017, that was just $2 million. So to give you some perspective of $10.5 trillion, that's $14 million per minute, nearly half of the US GDP, or about 4 times the GDP of England, 4.5 times, nearly 5 times the cost of the Afghanistan war. And again, you need to remember that the odds that your firm will have a successful phishing attack in 2023 are about 1 in 2. That really sums up why the rule exists today and why the SEC created it. And to use the geeky technical term, this is bad. The word the SEC uses is adverse. This is an important point, and we're going to get to it in just a minute. There are a lot of rules that cover this ground already. The Investment Advisor's Compliance Guide, an excellent book, hits on this a lot of well before the rule was in place. The existing regulations, though, they're unclear, they're overlapping, and this rule condenses all of those requirements into a single regulatory rule. This is actually the clearest government regulation I've ever seen on cybersecurity and the most helpful. Most of the regulations across industries boil down to stay secure, but they don't tell you what those expectations are. And so this rule protects you from the standpoint that you can objectively say that you were or were not doing what the SEC wants and expects you to do. Okay, and this is a proposed rule, came out in spring of 2022. So why does it already matter? Well, the SEC clearly believes that they have the power to enforce these rules already. They note early on in the rule that advisors are required to minimize risk for their clients as part of their fiduciary duty. And a fiduciary obligation, this is, of course, the cornerstone, the foundation of many, if not most, of the regulations that RIAs are under. The foundation is that you have this obligation to your clients to minimize risk, but that also includes information about keeping it confidential, backup and disaster recovery plans, proper administrative and technology controls, and a lot more. It's not just being honest. In fact, you already ought to have language in your code of ethics that covers these types of things, that goes beyond just, we're not going to lie to you. And here's just a handful of the regulations and laws the SEC references in the proposed rule. I didn't go through and add all of the footnotes the SEC uses in the rule to go over the authority that they already have. The message is that the SEC can already enforce this today. Whether or not the rule becomes official, these are the standards the SEC is going to hold you to. And again, the good news is that this rule clarifies a lot of things, especially from the IT perspective. The SEC does the best job I've ever seen a government agency do in clarifying cybersecurity expectations. All right, so let's roll into the rule. First, let's look at the changes to disclosures. First, there's changes to the ADV2 form. The SEC wants to know when you've been attacked, and some of the information that goes onto this form will be confidential and some of it won't. Then there's changes to the CRS form. This is probably the worst part of the disclosures because this part is not confidential. Everyone on this webinar has a link to their CRS form at the bottom of your webpage. Can you imagine adding a new section that lists every successful cyber attack against your firm in the last 5 years? That is what the SEC wants you to do. And then there's changes to a bunch of other forms. And under the new rule, you only have 48 hours to notify the SEC that you are under an attack. And you only have 48 hours to tell your clients that you are under attack. And you will be required to disclose every previous incident to your prospective clients. And remember, under the record-keeping rules, the SEC expects you to keep all of this on file for 5 years. 48 hours is barely enough time to know if you are actually under attack or there's some other anomaly that's come up, or if someone internally just screwed something up and maybe tripped a security alarm. It's not enough time to know if it's a material attack, if it's an attack. And it's not enough time typically to determine what the effect on your office or your clients is going to be. All right, so with that, let's move into the technical controls. Each one of these technical controls has a corresponding administrative control. We'll touch on a couple of those, but we're not going to go over all of them. And this is because you already ought to have most of these controls in place from an administrative point of view. The technical controls exist to ensure that you are compliant, or in other words, the tech controls exist to make sure that you do what you say you're going to do from the technology perspective. In the past, your paperwork could say that you were going to stay secure, and if you checked off a few boxes, you could be considered compliant. But today, there are specific technical controls that you ought to have in place. All right, and get ready. There is a lot to cover here. And instead of glazing your eyes over, I'm going to briefly touch on each subject and then move on. I recommend that you write down any questions that you have, and we can cover them in the Q&A at the end. So first up is identity and access management. This really isn't new. Your systems need to ensure that people that don't need access to client information don't have access and can't have access to it. For example, your receptionist shouldn't have information on clients, on portfolios, on trades, and your vendors shouldn't have access to any more information than they need to have access to do their jobs. Your code of ethics should already be covering who has access to what and ought to limit access confidential information to those that need to know it. And this can be a very far-reaching regulation. All right, it touches your summer interns. And your computers, your network needs to ensure that your interns don't have access to more than that they need to. And it's not a hypothetical situation. We already work with advisors that deal exactly with this. And the executives at your firm, you may not even need access to this. At my own firm, as the owner, as the president, I limit my access to information and systems to the greatest degree that's reasonable. Because who are the attackers going to target first? It's not the intern, even if it's important that we limit their access to. Now, that doesn't mean I can't get access to that information. Okay, I own the company and I have the right to access the information that we have. But the computer systems don't give me access to that information by default. So don't confuse what you have the right to access and what your systems should allow you to access or will allow you to access today. And as part of all of this, you need to log who accessed what and when they accessed it. You should have a system that audits these logs to ensure that only authorized persons access confidential information. Now, again, I'm not a lawyer, but I recommend that you keep these records for years, typically 5 years. And this is harder today than it ever was before. There's more places to keep your data. It's easier to share. Logging is easy, but it is so verbose that it is hard to comb through all of those logs to look for abnormalities. This is what it looks like from the IT perspective. There's still only one needle, but now it is 10 stacks of hay. So what's the bottom line? You need to have technology that enforces this. And it needs to cover all of the applications that you use. And there's a lot of them today. And you need to be able to log and audit all of it. And you're going to need tools to do it. You can't audit all of this by hand. Which really gets into our next portion, mobile device management, abbreviated as MDM. You guys don't know anything about acronyms in your own industry, right? And so this is a part of identity and access management, because access management includes controlling where you can access data from and if it's a secure location or device. And so this is for all of your mobile devices, for your iPhones, your iPads, your laptops. And what this is going to do is it is going to enforce the administrative controls that you already have in place. So that includes identity access management, which limits access to data and turns off remote access to it, or requires secure connections to access data. Starbucks, Panera, the Admirals Club at the airport, the hotel or conference center that you stay at, none of those are secure locations. Your MDM should also force your users to have passcodes on their phone, to be encrypted, and have the ability to remotely wipe a device if it's been lost, stolen, or left in your Uber. And if you don't have those security controls in place, it should not give you access to confidential information. And again, you need to log that you did all of this. And this isn't crazy stuff, but a lot of firms don't do it or don't do it properly. So let's think about it. Have you ever used a non-work approved phone to look up a client's portfolio or trades or other confidential information? Have you ever let one of your child's have one of your devices to watch TikTok or YouTube so that you can have an adult conversation. Or if you ever borrowed your spouse's phone, maybe during vacation, just to look something up real quick. And even if you didn't, how would you prove that you hadn't done it? Do your computer and technology systems log every time data was accessed so that you can show that you never accessed this confidential information inappropriately? Now, there are real emergencies, and sometimes things literally catch on fire, or you have to deal with a natural disaster or something like that. But your MDM should ensure that access during these emergencies are exceptions and not the rule, and that those are logged. All right, so let's look at updating your software now, which is also going to be part of MDM. And before your eyes glaze over and you say, we've got this covered, you need to remember that all of your software needs to be kept up to date. And every single time that we go in and audit an environment and do an assessment for somebody, we find something that is out of date, and sometimes it's years out of date. And there's just a lot of things to keep up with today. Here's just a handful of common applications. Most of the browsers that you use need to be updated at least once a week today to cover new security holes that are found. And you need to update your phone and your computer and your tablets. For example, I can't access my company email from my iPhone if I'm not running a current and secure version of Apple's iPhone software. And all of these applications here, by the way, also need to be updated on your phone and tablet. And of course, you need to log that the software was updated. In other words, you will have a record that says you did what you said you were going to do for when the SEC comes and audits you. And this flows right into our next section, vulnerability management, because if you're not updating things, you've got vulnerabilities. And so this is where you're going to actively and systematically look for where your systems are weak, which at a minimum means that they've been updated. This is typically both an automated and a manual process. There's a lot of things that can be tested with software, but not all of it. And you are going to document everything that you find. And you're going to write down your plans to fix it, because nobody can make their environment 100% secure. You need to document what your plans are to fix the weaknesses, or explain why you're not going to fix something. So sometimes it's not worth fixing. You need to document that. Sometimes you cannot fix something. You require a vendor to fix it, and they haven't yet. And larger firms are going to be held to a higher standard than smaller firms. And sometimes there's just more important things to work on right now. And that's fine, but write it down. And don't forget to follow the plan. All right, so we're running a little short on time here, but let's get to data loss prevention called DLP. A good DLP plan requires that the elements we've already covered are in place: identity and access management, mobile device management, and vulnerability management. I know that it sounds obvious. All it means is don't let non-public data leave your systems, your computer network, your email. But it's not easy, and this part is highly technical. You don't have to know all of it, but you need to understand that. Now, under existing rules, you already aren't supposed to let this kind of information leave your firm, right? So this is the technical way to enforce it, and it's the technical way to catch it when it does happen. So this includes things like keeping USB drives turned off, having your email scanned for confidential information as you send them. So if social security numbers or banking numbers, etc., are detected, your email system should block it from being sent. And most cloud file systems let you share data easily, almost too easily, and you need to limit that or turn it off. And don't skimp on this one, even if you're the IT person and think you have it under control. It's so easy to set up cloud sharing applications as a non-IT person that most firms have way more file sharing apps than you're aware of. Or the last guy that set up the application didn't lock it down, even though you thought it did. So just like your email, your firewall is going to scan your outgoing network traffic, and it's going to look for network traffic to or from unauthorized cloud sharing applications, to unauthorized countries or locations. And it's going to see at the very least if it exists, if traffic to these other non-approved cloud sharing applications is there on your phone or computer. And again, you're going to log and you're going to audit it all. All right. So ongoing training, here's the non-technical portion of it. And you're expected to have regular security training for your team. Nearly every successful attack has a human element as part of it. You might do everything up to this point perfect, but it only takes one person and one mistake for there to be an incident. You need to be able to train by the rule. You're not going to train your executives and your summer interns the same way. So some of the ways that firms can do ongoing training includes automated phishing tests, quizzes, and updates on recent threats at staff meetings. Hey team, did you see that phishing email that was supposedly from our president this week? Did any of you see that link that was coming around as a phishing email? Those are examples of things that you might bring up at a staff meeting. And typically you ought to do in-person trainings, usually about once a year. All right, so now let's look at a risk assessment. This is going to go over the things that we've talked about so far. And it's not the same as your vulnerability program. Your vulnerability program works constantly to keep things safe and to document where there are holes. The assessment is a point-in-time test and documentation of your environment and the risks. And this is both technical risk and, more importantly, business risk. Because the risk to your business is client risk. And if your business is compromised to the point that you can't function adequately or confidential information leaves, then you have breached your fiduciary duty. Now, this part doesn't have to be hard, especially after you've done it for the first time. Most of you already have a similar framework in place for your clients. You sit down with them and you identify their goals. You go over the different ways to reach those goals. You talk about the different risks that they face along the way and what kind of tolerance they have. And then you put together a plan that balances all of this so that they can reach their goals, so that they can reach their dreams. You write it down and you do it again next year. All right, so the cybersecurity risk assessment is the same framework, but from the technical perspective. And really, to go aside from the main portion of the webinar for a second, this is also about helping you reach your own hopes and dreams and goals, right? So this is what you do for your clients every day. Doing it in the cybersecurity space, though, makes sure that you're not open to unnecessary risk that will stop you from reaching your own goals. All right, so let's talk about security versus compliance for a minute to get back on track. So security is following the spirit of the rules and it's keeping things secure. To be compliant, not only do you need to do it, you need to document and prove that you did the things that you said you were going to do. It does not mean you have to be perfect about it. And it doesn't mean you'll never have an incident. In fact, I can almost guarantee that you will have an incident at some point in time. And it's not just filling out the paperwork, but because it's the government, there's a lot of that too. All right, so what else? These are the core parts of the rules, all right? While there's always a lot more, there's always something else you can put in place. These are the primary things that the SEC outlined in the cybersecurity rule. So what's the next thing you can do? You can get a free cybersecurity assessment from us. We're not going to ask you for your passwords. It's up to you whether or not you want to involve your current IT. We're not going to remove any of your data. And what's the catch? There isn't a catch. Most of you already offer free assessments yourselves to clients or prospective clients. I think everyone deserves to be secure. You deserve to be secure. Your clients deserve to be secure. American businesses more broadly deserve to be secure. So get a free cybersecurity assessment on us today. This is the same assessment that we use for our clients and that we use on ourselves. This is one of the most valuable offers I can make to you today. And if you feel like it's too soon, like we haven't been dating long enough, you can still download our ebook on cybersecurity for RIAs at this link, or you can just go to our website and you'll find it there. Do me a favor, would you please give me some feedback on this webinar? Put a 1 through 10 in the Q&A, 1 being this was awful and a waste of my time, and 10 being this was fantastic, and I would recommend it to anybody and everybody. All right, thanks for attending. And again, please make sure to take the next step today. Don't go away with a head full of knowledge, but an empty action plan. Call us or email cybersecurity to info@cybersecureria.com to get that free assessment and download our ebook. Have something on hand, have something to go over, or have something to show your security team or your IT department or your partners what's required in the new rule. Again, thank you so much. We'll stick around for Q&A for a little bit.